So today's daf is daf mem zayin. We'll start with Omar Rava. Lo shanu. So let's give a little bit introduction to Rava. And this is on the Gemara on daf mem vav that according to Rabbi Ami, when the Mishnah says that she was eating one tamra after the other in the last part of the Mishnah, that's talking about a woman who received Kiddushin with many tamras. And he said to her, bazu, ubazu, bazu, without repeating the word Masechet. And if she ate the first tamros before she completed to receive the last tamros, she's not mekudeshes, because he wants to be mekadesh her with the last tamra. And only if the last tamra is worth a pruta is the Kiddushin valid. So Rava makes the following comment: Lo shanu. This halacha that's recorded in the last part of the Mishnah, that if she ate the first tamros, she's not mekudeshes, unless there is a tamra that is still left bachrona, the last tamra, and it's worth a pruta. That only applies ella in the scenario of the amrla bezu ubazu ubazu, that he gave her one tamra and he said his kachi li bazu. She ate that tamra, and immediately he gave her another tamra, and he said, bazu. She ate that one as well. And then he gave her a third tamra, and said to her, bazu. And since when the Baal gave her all the first tamros, and she ate them one by one, before he finished to complete his Masechet Kiddushin, and his dibur is still continuing, then his kavana was he wanted to give the first tamros as a pikadon, and he's leading up to the last tamra, which is going to be the kesef kiddushin. Once she ate the first tamros, then she owes a milva, a chov, to pay for the value of the tamros that she ate, because those were given to her only as a pikadon. And therefore, if he's mochel that milva, she's not mekudeshes, because hamakadosh b'milva ain't a mekudeshes. Aval, but says Rava, Omer Lofi said to her, Hare mekudeshes be'elu, and then after he said be'elu, he gave her the tamros. That means that he wanted all the tamros to be kesef kiddushin, because they all were given to her and transferred to her after he finished Hare mekudeshes be'elu. And therefore, filu ocheles, even if she ate the first tamros, nami mekudeshes, because what is she eating? She's eating the kesef kiddushin, which is given to her as her personal ownership. Kika achla, when she's eating, midinafsha ka achla. So it's not a milva, and there's no issue here. Says Rava makadosh b'milva. The Gemara is going to try to prove Rava based on a brisa, because that which she ate from her own, and therefore, when he completes his dibur, all the tamros that he gave her were given to her not b'toras pikadon, but rather b'toras kesef kiddushin. She therefore acquires ownership over them, and if she eats them, she's eating her own tamros. There's no milva over here. So there's no problem, says Rava, in the case of Elu, if she eats the tamros one after the other as soon as she gets them, even before he completes his dibur. Because the Elu indicates that he's giving all of these tamros b'toras kesef kiddushin. Tani kavase de Rava, a brisa to support Rava. A man is giving a woman a number of different kinds of payros, and he says to us, "Kachili bi'ilon," or alon. Alon is food that's normally given to the pigs in the forest, and it's called eichlon in German, and people eat it. They fry. Okay, mommy's in here. You want to go in?
Yeah.
Okay. So that people eat this, and they roast it like you roast chestnuts. And then rimon, which of course is pomegranates, egos, which is walnuts. Okay, so that's one scenario in this brisa where he was makadish her with the following different types of fruits. Another scenario is Sha'omar Allah is Kachi Libi Elu. Instead of specifying the alon, the rimon, and the egos, he just said in a general way, Bi Elu. Im yesh bekulon shava pruta mekudeshes. We can integrate all of these fruits together, calculate how much they're worth in totality, and if they're worth a pruta, the Kiddushin is valid. V'im lav, if even after you integrate the alon, the rimon, the goats, you still don't add up to a pruta, ein mekudeshes, because we pass like Beis Hillel, and you need a shava pruta. The brisa continues. If he said to her, "Is kachili bazu ubazu bazu," he did not use the word be'elu, nor did he specify which are the fruits. He just said bazu bazu bazu. Then even in this case, in yesh bekulon shava pruta mekudeshes lavena mekudeshes. Here too, you have to calculate and integrate all the different fruits and see if at the end of the day they equal to one pruta. Now, why did the brisa bother to divide up these two cases as if they're two different categories? And the answer is that there is a difference, as Rashi points out here, in the dinim here, in a case where she ate the peiros before he completed the Gemar Kiddushin, as we'll soon see b'hamshech habrisa. Now, the brisa continues and says the following. If he says to her, "Is kachi li bazu," and he gives the pri over to her hand, notlasa, immediately she takes the pri, v'achlasa, on receiving the pri, she ate the pri. And then he gave her a second pri, and he said to her, "Bazu." And once again, v'natlaso v'achalto. She consistently eats the pri as soon as she receives the pri. He gives her a third pri, v'od bazu. And she eats it. V'od bazu, and she eats it. We cannot integrate all the fruits into one and calculate a pruta. There's got to be a pruta specifically in one of the fruits. And even if the total value of all these fruits equals a pruta, she's not mekudeshes. And the reason for that is because if he repeats bazu, ubazu, and between each one he gives her a fruit which she eats immediately, then we cannot integrate these fruits into one whole. So the Gemara is going to now analyze this brisa and come to the conclusion that this brisa is going to support Rava. And again, as we go along in Mitzvah, we'll repeat and review Rava. Hi ba'alon berimon be'egos hechidomi. What exactly is the case where he specifies the names of the different categories of fruits that he's giving up for Kiddushin? If you're going to assume that he said to her, his kachi li, o ba'alon, o berimon, o be'egos, then that's impossible. You can't say that you put the O as if he's giving her a choice of one of three fruits to serve and function as kesef kiddushin, because then the brisa says in yesh bekulon shava pruta mekudeshes. We have to integrate all the fruits together in order to arrive at a total calculation of one pruta. Why? Va'oka Omar, he told her that any of the above could serve as kesef kiddushin. He's not integrating them all. He's not integrating them all into one. The Ella, but rather we have to reinterpret the brisa. And he said to her, "Is kachili ba'alon uberimon ubergos," together, all three of them, and therefore we can integrate all to one shear if the total value of these three together, A plus B plus C, is shava prut. So now the Gemara asks the following kasha: Hainu bazu ubazu. Why did the brisa have to go on in the next case and bazu ubazu bazu? That's exactly the case of alon, rimon, vegos, because we just interpreted it as a case of o be'ilon, o and o. And we rejected that interpretation, and therefore we came to the conclusion that Bilon, Brimon, Vagos is not where he says oh, but rather it's a case of bazu, bazu, bazu. So we're back to the second part of the brisa. You're just repeating the same thing over and over again. Elalav, therefore we have no choice, but we have to add another word into his language, his Lashon HaKiddushin. And what did he say? He said, Elav di Amalot be'elu. I'm just going to I'm going to have to take a break, Rabbi, because of the children here. Just 1 second. So the Gemara says that at this point we have no choice other than interpreting the brisa as referring to a case of be'elu. And now we understand the brisa. Why? Because when he said iskachi li be'elu, the brisa wants to teach me two things. Number one, be'elu integrates all the different tamras into one, which allows us to calculate and add the value of this tamra, this fruit, with that fruit and that fruit, in order to arrive at a pruta, integrating all three. And then in the next case of the brisa, bezu ubazu bezu, the brisa wants to and feels compelled to teach me the din that even if he said bazu bezu, it's equal to be'elu. And he meant to say this and this and this, and we integrated it all together. And I would just point out here that in the language of the brisa, there's a vav hamachaber, bezu ubezu, ubezu. So we're adding them all together. So the Gemara asks the following question: V'amidik tani seifa, at the end of the beginning of the brisa, which he calls the seifa because relative to the ratio, it's the seifa. It says Osha Amalas Kachi Li Be'elu. So the case of Be'elu is explicit in the brisa. Michlal, the ratio Lav Be'elu Askin. We certainly have to derive the conclusion that in the beginning of the brisa, it's not a case of Be'elu. So how can you tell me that we're talking about Be'elu when Be'elu appears explicitly in the Seifa of the ratio? And the Gemara answers that, you know what? The ratio of the brisa is talking about a case where he gave her alon, rimon, ve'egos, and he said to us, kachli be'elu, as we interpreted before. The Seifa is talking about a case where, again, he says, is kachli be'elu. And you know what? It's not adding another halacha. Sometimes you find two scenarios and each one is a different halacha. No. Sometimes the second scenario is really the first scenario, which is called in the Gemara's language, typical Talmudic language, Pirusha Kamafarish. The Sefer is coming to interpret the Resha, that when he said to her, is kachi li be'elu, be'alon, be'rimonu be'elu, ubegos, and he didn't use the word be'elu, notice, ketzad, when do we integrate the three fruits to form a shava pruta and validate the Kiddushin? That's kigon, sha'oma dama la is kachi li be'elu. So now we've pretty much wrapped up a very nice package here to understand this brisa. And the brisa is talking about two cases. One case in which he said to her, alon rimon vegos, but he gave her alon rimon vegos, and then he said to us, kachi li be'elu. Second case is where he said, is kachi li bezu, bezu, bezu. And the din is the same, identical in both cases, because his kavana was to integrate all three into one Kiddushin. And if indeed there's a shava prut at the end of the day from all these three, then she's mekudeshes. Now we go on to the Sefer of the brisa. uktani seifa, bezu natalto viachalto, etc., etc. Every time he gave her a fruit, she ate it immediately. And then the halacha is, no, we cannot integrate them all into shavpruta, but rather you have to be able to identify and isolate one particular fruit that has the value, the market value of a pruta. Now, the Gemara is going to say that this distinction in the Brisa is in the case of Makadish Bezu Ubezu, and we made that distinction, and we said that if she didn't eat them, then we can integrate them, and it's like Bielu. But if she ate them, then eating each one separately is going to undermine the Kiddushin. So the Gemara says, Ve'ilu Bereisha, in the case of Bielu, Lovka Maflig, the Brisa makes no distinctions between Ochelis and Maneches. It seems from the Lishna Distama, meaning the unqualified language of the Brisa, that even if she were to eat the Peiros before he completed the Nesina and gave her all three categories of Peiros, we can still integrate the Peiros into a share of a Shava Pruta. And the Gemara says the only way of justifying that conclusion is based on Rava's principle. Shma Mina, we have to conclude Rava, that called Hecha Diamar La Bi Elu Ki Ka'achla B'Nafshi Ka'achla. That when he integrates all the fruits into one Maisa Kiddushin, even though she ate one by one, it was all given to her, not B'Toras Pikadon, but B'Toras Kesef Kiddushin, and therefore it's hers, which is called in the language of Rava, Ki Ka'achla, not Midanafshi Ka'achla. She's eating her own fruits. If he would say to Harayat Mekudeshes Li, Bezu Ubezu, in other words, he's telling her that he wants to Mekadesh her with this, with this, with this. He hasn't yet completed his dibur. He doesn't have the intention of giving her Kesef Kiddushin. He's telling her that any one of these is Kesef Kiddushin, and the first one, if you eat it before I complete my dibur, is a pikadon. And therefore, once she eats the fruits, she has a milva to pay him back, and we cannot integrate the fruits together into one kesef kiddushin, but rather it's mekadesh b'milva, and therefore she's only mekudeshes if the last one will have a shalom pruta shma mina. We see a clear-cut proof to support Rav's conclusion. Now, we had a shita of Rav and Shmuel back on Daf Mem Vav against Rabbi Ami, and the controversy was how to interpret the Mishnah of Hoysel Chelos Rishona Eina Mekudeshes. According to Rav and Shmuel, it means that this din goes back to the Reisha of the Mishnah. In the case of Omer Leisha is Kadshili B'Tamazu, is Kadshili B'Zu, and his intention was to be Mekadesh her with one of these various, let's say, fruits or whatever it is he gave her. If there's not one specific one that independently is worth a pruta, the Kiddushin is not valid. And the Mishnah adds to that din applies not only in a case where she left the tamros on the table, and you still need a shav pruta in each tamra, but even if she ate the first one immediately and she benefited from it, she's not mekudeshes if it didn't have the value of a pruta. Rabbi Ami disagreed. According to Rabbi Ami, I'm just reviewing what we did on Daf Mem Vav, he explains that the din goes back on the seif of the Mishnah. The din at the end of the Mishnah, you remember, where she eats one by one. And that's a case of Mekadesh Be'isha with many tamros together. And they're all mitztarfos, they all are integrated to form one shear of a shava pruta. And on that, the Mishnah added that if she ate the first ones before he finished the Gemara Kiddushin, she's not mekudeshes, because there's no possibility of integrating that which she ate already. So the Gemara now asks the following kasha: if you're going to with Rabbi Ami's shita, that the case where she ate one by one is referring to the Seifa. Umay, and what does the Mishnah have in mind when it says Ad Sheyehei B'Yachas Mem Shava Pruta, Ad Sheyehei B'Achrona Shava Pruta? In other words, according to Rabbi Ami, you must have a Shava Pruta in the last Tamra, because the first Tamros that she ate could not be considered Kesef Kiddushin once she eats it. So we must have a Shava Pruta in the last Tamra. Is Hachinami. We can now understand our situation here. Ad Sheyehei B'Achrona Shava Pruta. Our Brisa likewise is talking about a case where he was Makadisha with many fruits Yachtov in one. She ate the first ones. She's not Mekudeshes unless B'Achrona, there's Shava Pruta, Elo L'Rav U'L'Shmuel D'Amri Shavaya Reisha Koi. They understood that the last case in the Mishnah, where she ate them one by one, is a reflection and an interpretation of the Reisha. And he wants to Makadish her with one Tamra, not like Rabbi Ami's interpretation, where he wants to Makadish her with all, so he wants to Makadish her with one of them. And therefore, if any of the Tamros, any single one of the Tamros has a Shava Pruta, then she would be Mekudeshes, even if she already ate it. The Ocheles Itzrichle. And the Chiddush is that even though she ate the Tamra, and she was Megaladas, that she benefited from the Peros, she's not Mekudeshes with less than a Shava Pruta. Remember, we had a Hamamina that because of her special immediate pleasure, that's considered to her like a Shava Pruta. Kamashmal, no, it's got to be objectively market value Shava Pruta. Is that Hacha, when we apply it to our Brisa, Klole Kachashiv Prati Lo Kachashiv. The Brisa is talking about exclusively, singularly, only a case where it's Makadisha with many, many fruits, Biklos. But not a case where he was Makadisha with each Pri Biprotus. So what does the Brisa mean now when it says in Yesh Bi Achas Mihen Shava Pruta Mekudeshes, that you need to identify and isolate one of the fruits as Mekudeshes, if the case of the Brisa is Bechlalos, as we explained above, that he wanted to integrate all of them into one. So why does the Brisa say Im Yesh Biachas Mehem Shava Pruta Mekudeshes? Why not integrate them all? And the Gemara answers, Almani Rebbe Hiti Omer Loshna Kizayis Kizayis Veloshna Kizayis Ukizayis Protahavi. Okay, now we have to get into the laws of Pigul. And according to Rebbe, whether or not he adds the letter Vav, and he says Kizayis Ukizayis, or if he doesn't add the Vav, and he says Kizayis Kizayis without the extra Vav, he does not have any intention of joining them all together, but rather he's porate each one unto itself. Now, for this, we have to learn Masechet Zmachim, and it's an entire sugya, Daf Lamed Amid Beis, Daf Chavtes Amid Beis, in a case where a person shechts a carbon on the condition that he'll eat a kizayis chutz l'mokom, chutz l'zman, and the carbon is possible. Now, if he eats the carbon, in that particular case, he's potter from kares. But if he shechts on the condition to eat a kizayis liachar zman, for example, let's say in a carbon shlomim, you have 2 yomim and laila echad, then it's pigul. And if he eats it, he's chayiv kares. So there's a machlokas tanoim over there in Masechet Zvachim. What's the din if he shechts on the condition to eat a kezayis min a karbon chutz zmano, and at the same time a kezayis of the carbon chutzum koma? Rav Yehuda says we have to check which machshava came first. Did he originally think to eat chutzum zmano, and then he changed his mind and he added chutzum koma? And then it's pigul and his chayiv kares. But if, on the other hand, if he thought from the beginning to eat a chutzum komo, then it's possible, but it's not a chayiv kares. The chachamim say no, bein bazeh, bein bazeh, it's not possible. I'm sorry, it's not chayiv kares, but it's possible. Because we're going to consider that he mixed his machshavas, he combined them and integrated together. In any event, getting back to our sugya here, according to Rebbe, who says loshna kizais, kizais loshna, kizais u kizais, there's no difference between a person who says his kachi li bazu bazu or his kachi li bazu u bazu. In both cases, he didn't have the kavana to be makadishar with all the payers together, but rather with one of them specifically. And therefore, he holds that she is not mekudeshes unless one of the payros in and of itself is worth a pruta. If it's not worth a pruta, only if you add and integrate the others, she's not mekudeshes. Even though the Brisa says hoysel cheles, that doesn't mean bidafka. And even if she would leave the payros on the table, we cannot be mitzaref to the shir of shava pruta, because the das HaMakadosh was to be Makadosh with one of them. So it comes out, according to this interpretation, there's a machlokas between the Tana who learned the Reisha of the Brisa and the Tana who taught the Seif of the Brisa. And the Reisha, if he said to us Kachi Lipi Elu, or he said Bazu U Bazu, then, and only then, do we integrate them all together to one Masechet Kiddushin. And therefore, only if together they equal a shava pruta, she's mukudeshes, even though, and that's the chiddush, I don't know whether you call it lakula or lachumra, but in any event, that even though each one individually does not have a shava pruta, nevertheless, we can integrate them all to create a shava pruta. However, the seifa, by contrast, a woman's kiddushin is not valid unless one of the peiros, bifnei atzman, is a shava pruta. And these two parts of the Brisa reflect two different shitas in the Tanoim. Omar Rav, this is one of the most famous sugis of Masechet Kiddushin. Hamakadosh b'milva eina mekudeses. Milva lo tzadnitna. What is milva lo tzadnitna? When I give someone a loan, the lover owns that money. He has a chov, but the money itself is his. And therefore, if he had lent money to this woman in the past, that money is hers. He can't be mekadosh with that money. And that's called milva lo tzadnitna, meaning that the money once transferred from the malva's hands to the lover's hands belongs to the lover. He can use that money in any way he so pleases. And so too, if he had lent money to a woman, it's her money. Now, the Gemara doesn't explicitly quote an Amora that disagrees with Rav, but the Gemara says, Nema ketanoi, perhaps this issue about Rav's Makadosh b'milva is really dependent upon two Tanoim. And these are quoted in a Brisa. HaMakadosh b'milva eina mekudeshes, yesh omri mekudeshes. My lav b'hakam mifli, mar savar milva lo tzadnitnu, mar savar lav lo tzadnitnu. What does that mean, lav lo tzadnitnu? And therefore the Kiddushin is valid. That means that the lova always has to have the money available to pay back the malva. In other words, when the lova uses the money, he doesn't have carte blanche. He's got to invest the money and spend the money in a way that he always has something to pay back the malva with. So basically, when a man is Makadesh b'milva, he's saying to the following: those mos, which really still belong to me because milva lav lo tzadit, no, and they always have to be available and accessible to pay me back, they belong to you for Kiddushin. So that Rav's Shita is predicated on the principle of milva lo tzadit, which is not universally accepted. So the Gemara rejects this for Tizbara, Amos Sefer. Let's look at the Sefer of the Brayso. Mishavim b'mecher shezeh kana. And what that means is that if I'm selling you something and I want to pay you up, then I can pay you with a milva. And let's say, for example, karkas niknes bekesef. And now, on the mos that the lova owes the malva, the lova could sell his karka to the malva, and the malva purchases the karka of the lova with the mos that he had lent and extended as a loan to the lova. The iamrit milva lo tzadit my kana. I don't get it. Where's the kesef, the mos, with which you facilitated kinyan on the karka? The mos did not belong to the lokeach, who in this case is the malva, because the mos did not belong to the lova, who is the lokeach, because milva lo tzadit. In other words, maybe I wasn't clear. The lova owns the money that he received as alva, and therefore the malva, who now wants to purchase the karka of the lova, is not giving the lova any mos for that purchase. So how could it be that Akol Modim in the Sefer, b'mecher shezeh kana, that the kinyan is valid? So now the Gemara has concluded that there's no machlokas tanoim in the Brayso that depends upon whether milva lo tzadit or not, but rather we have to reinterpret the machlokas. That's what we're going to do now, according to Rav Nachman. The Brayso is not talking about a case of Ana Makadesh Isha B'mos Shehil V'la, but rather Amar Rav Nachman, Huna Chavrin Mokim Lo B'midi Achore, V'hachamai Askinon Kigon Sha'omar Lo Eskadshili B'mana, V'nimtza Mana Chaser Dina. Right, so Mana should have 100, and it turns out it only had 99. He gave her a bag full of coins, and it was meant to be 100 dinrim, which is a mana, and it turned out to be 99 dinrim. And now the question is whether the Kiddushin is valid. Mar Sovar, according to one sheet in the Tana, Ksifa le Milsa, she's embarrassed le mitbe to demand the extra dinar, and therefore she doesn't have smichus das, because really she wants that extra dinar. She was just too embarrassed to ask it back, and therefore the Kiddushin is not valid. Umar, some of the other Tana holds, lo ksifa le Milsa le mitbe, she's not embarrassed to ask for the extra dinar that was missing. And if she didn't do so, then we have to conclude that she was somech taita, that some later time he'll pay her up that last dinar that was missing, and the Kiddushin is valid. So Gemara asks, "V'laha diyomer Rabbi Lazar is kadshi li b'mana v'nasal dinar harezim v'kudesh v'yashlim." Rabbi Lazar is of the opinion that you don't even have to give them the entire mana for Kiddushin; just give one single dinar. Is Lema Ketanoy Omer L'Shmaita? Should we say that Rabbi Lazar was really entering into this minefield of this great controversy of the Tanoim? And the Gemara says, Amri, the Bnei Yeshiva explained that we have to distinguish between the two cases. Mana Chaser Dinar, in the case of a man who was Makadesh with a mana, and it turns out there were only 99 dinrim, Ksifa La Milsa L'Mitbeh, certainly she's embarrassed to demand that last dinar, and therefore the Kiddushin is not valid. She wasn't somech das. But in the case of Mana Chaser Tisha V'Teisha Dinrim, if instead of giving her 99, he gave her one single dinar and he's missing 99 dinar, load ksifle milsalim. No one would be embarrassed to ask for it. And therefore, we have to assume that she accepted one single dinar for Kiddushin, as we saw in Rabbi Elazar, but that's not against the Tanoim, any of the Tanoim. He gave her a pikadon. Now he wants to be mekadosh with that pikadon. And she went to check out the pikadon. And she finds that the pikadon is gone. If part of the pikadon is still left and it's worth a pruta mikudeshes, it's a valid Kiddushin imla. If what's left is less than the shir of a shava pruta, ain't a mikudeshes. Upemilva, if there's money that she had borrowed from him in her hands, and they was stolen, the money was stolen or lost, afal pishlo nishtayre ben shava pruta mikudeshes. The Tanakama of this brisa is of the opinion that in this hana that he gave her, that he was mochel the piron of the milva, she's mekudeshes. But Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Rabbi Shum, Rabbi Meir,